Right, let us now go and do some head-to-heads, as we like to call it. This is Mike Buckley, a political commentator, and Patrick Timms, editor of Wolves of Westminster, going to join us now to have a discussion about some of the topics today. Morning to you both. Hello.
Hi there.
Hi.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Can we start off then with the story? It's in all the papers today, but I've chosen the Mail to actually read the headline of "Patient safety is on a knife edge ahead of the walkout by doctors." They're saying that patient care across the NHS is resting on this knife edge. This is according to health chiefs. It's a 4-day walkout, begins on Tuesday, billed as the most significant action in a decade, involves kind of nigh on 50,000 medics in pursuit of a 35% pay rise. If I can actually come to you first of all, Patrick, for your thoughts on this.
Well, what we read is that this is basically a BMA action, and it appears to be that it's a 35% pay rise that is being asked for. Now, of course, that's really very, very significant. And just as you say, just as the Mail says, this is the most significant action, I think, in quite some time. Now, there have to be questions raised as to, one, whether or not that's realistic. I mean, the government has said that it's not. Then again, they wouldn't they? It also, of course, is coming right off the back of a bank holiday weekend, when we also know that many people are going away. And then I think that comes back to one of the other stories that we're going to talk about later on as well, and the chaos that's been in transport. You know, so people might get injured, people might get ill. And it's one of those times when really this is, I mean, I think it is, it's one of those scenarios that for me comes back to a bit of an Oliver Twist kind of story, doesn't it? You know, please, sir, can I have some more? All the unions are doing this at the moment. You know, can you say bandwagon? Now, with that said, I think...
Well, you could also argue that you know, that people have put this on the back burner while we got through COVID. I mean, you could you can spin it either which way, can't you? Or maybe that they sent blood in the water. Who knows?
Yes.
Mike, what were you going to say, Patrick? Sorry?
I was just going to say, it's one of those where, yes, you know, we've come out of the back of a time when the country needed to come together, and that included the trade unions and the vital professions, such as the medics. And now perhaps people are, as you say, thinking, well, do you know what? Now it's time for us to get something back. I mean, do you think that's what's going on?
Yeah. Mike, your thoughts?
Well, I think it's a mark of how desperate junior doctors are, and many professionals in our country, I mean teachers, nurses, midwives and others, not because they're sensing a bandwagon or blood in the water or anything like that, but because we're in a cost of living crisis. We're all watching the price, particularly of food, go up, but other things as well, you know, energy, transport as well, you know, food costs, transport costs, mortgages are going up, rents are going up for a lot of people, you know, as a result. And yet people's wages have not done the same thing. Wages in our country haven't gone up really since 2008. I think that's the longest term stagnation for wages in 200 years, maybe 300 years. I mean, it's a very, very, very long time since wages stopped going up for that extended period of time, which of course is an indictment on the government that we've had for the vast majority of that time and their failure to manage the economy well. The effect on junior doctors in particular, because they've also suffered wage cuts, I think, is that their wages are worth 25% less now than they were worth in 2010. So given that, and given the fact that prices have gone up so much, it's no wonder that they're protesting. The junior doctors, as well as nurses and midwives that I've spoken to, I mean, they're not doing this lightly. They know that this will have an impact. And they, of course, have gone into the profession they've gone into to save lives, to save health. They're mortified a bit to have to do what they're doing. But they've had the conversations with the government, so they've tried to have the conversations with the government, and the government have just said, we don't want to talk to you, to the BMA, as they've said to so many other unions.
Well, they haven't said they don't want to talk. They just don't want to talk about the 35%, I think. Isn't that right? They don't want to
Yes,
talk.
that is right. The thing is, that's what the BMA want to talk about. It makes talking about anything else.
Yes, it does actually suggest that they don't want to talk to them. Yes, there is.
You know, it's like if somebody says, I want to come and talk about the fact you crashed into my car, and the person says, well, I'll talk about anything else. You know, that's the conversation they want to have. So this is a challenge to the government. It's up to the government now to actually end to talks with the BMA and at least enter the conversation. Maybe they don't give 35%, maybe they offer 15% or even 10% or 17%, but offer something that is reasonable, that takes account of the fact that wages have stagnated, wages have been cut, costs have gone up.
And also inflation, Patrick, is going to come down. At the it has been extraordinarily high, and that has been very scary, particularly when you look at the price of as Mike says, well, as everybody says, every single thing that you pay for has gone up. There is nothing where you think, oh, that's excellent, that appears to have gone down. There is nothing that I think, oh, petrol, the price of petrol the other day at £1.45, and I thought, look at that, that's not bad compared to 10 years ago. Yeah, it is, but nevertheless. But Patrick, that is the point, isn't it, really, that this is also partly to do with inflation.
Well, it is, and I think Mike is actually quite right to say that, and you're quite right to say that you see these effects everywhere. Well, what that means to me is that actually this is something, as you say, cost of living crisis, this is affecting everybody. And it isn't just affecting junior doctors, nor is it just affecting the nurses or teachers or that sort of thing. Now, I think part of the problem when you go into these kinds of negotiations is you have to come up with a fairly realistic offer of your own first. If you're trying to have, I do appreciate actually very much the point that Mike is making, and certainly the way that that the union negotiations tend to work. Obviously, you go in asking for more than you expect to get. Of course you do.
It's called haggling.
Of course you do. But yes, of course it is. But yes, but there is a difference between that, to my mind, and going in saying we want 35%. Bearing in mind these are junior doctors who can be on sort of something like £60,000 a year. Now they want 35% more, and that's for everyone, every single one of them. And you start adding up that bill. Now, I think if you want the government to come to the table, you have to start from a somewhat more realistic position, because if you're going to start with a position that is totally unrealistic to begin with, then what any government is going to do, of any colour I should add, is going to do is to say, come back when you've got your serious hat on. Now, I expect that's probably what's going on here. And the other thing we've got to bear in mind is the gun that's being held to people's heads, that, in this instance, the BMA has refused to exempt any particular services. Now, it says it has plans to protect patients. I don't think it's been entirely forthcoming on what those are. So, I think it also, I respect the fact that the government's attitude to this has been somewhat dismissive, but you also have to look at the other side of the coin and what the negotiating position and negotiating attitude has been of the people who are wanting to go into these negotiations. Yeah.
Actually, Emma, you wanted to say something just briefly here.
And I think we should also have a word or have a mention or have a thought for the people who are disrupted by this. Elderly people who maybe are waiting for a hip operation or something like that isn't critical but is extremely stressful when you're waiting and waiting, maybe in pain for months on end, not knowing, because in the latest strikes, things are being delayed sort of on a day-by-day rolling basis. We've got the backlog from weeks already of strikes across the most critical services, paramedics, nurses and junior doctors. So we've already got hundreds of thousands more on waiting lists. And then this bank holiday, this Easter disruption, and the new strike starting on Tuesday. So I think we just need to be aware that the NHS is for the patients. That's what the service is for. That is what they are there. That is who they are there to serve. And a lot of people are being stressed and disrupted and really inconvenienced in a medical sense by this, to say nothing of things like chemo not being administered, cancer diagnoses not being followed up, that kind of thing. It's extremely damaging.
Shall we move on to the next story? And this is about the ongoing issue, obviously, with migrants coming to the shores. There was a very interesting article recently talking about why Britain? Why do so many migrants want to come to Britain? And one suggestion was the fact that it is so easy to work in the black market in Britain. We don't have an ID card. Nobody can check, nobody can check whether you're actually allowed to work or anything else. It's incredibly easy to go and work in, car wash or nail bars or whatever else, and therefore make a living. So there was a question, how can the UK actually be less desirable for migrants? I know they're trying to make it very difficult and unpleasant, but how could you actually make it so that in the first place they don't think of the UK as being the first port of call? If I can come to you, first of all, Mike, on this.
Well, it isn't the case that the UK is more desirable than other countries. And the
so
US...
why don't they stay in France then, rather than making it over in boats from France? Why not say, I'm in France, let me just stay here?
Well, lots of people do. Lots of people go to Greece, go to Italy, of course, first, or travel to Germany. Germany takes far more migrants than we do. I think France takes more than we do as well. And there are other countries across Europe that all take large numbers as well. And what people don't do is look at the reasons why people come to the UK. Lots of people come to the UK because they already have a family member here. If you were a migrant and your mum was here, or your daughter or your cousin, maybe the only relative that you have in the world, you wouldn't want to be anywhere else. You would want to be here, and that is one of the top reasons.
But hold on a second, Mike. Sorry to interrupt you on that, but if you've got family here, then surely you're legally allowed to come through.
No,
there are other legal ways to come in, are there not? If you've got family,
there are almost no legal ways. The government's got rid of pretty much every legal way to come here, other than the Afghan resettlement scheme and the Ukraine resettlement scheme. But as you will know from all the coverage we've taken in, very, very few Afghans. We have these schemes to make us look good. I mean, one other thing that is worth saying is that the UK, and I know this because I spent some time as an aid worker a few years ago, but the UK, we have a great reputation, not because of this government, but because of our history. We have a reputation as a sensible, as a generous, as an even-handed country in large parts of the world. Obviously, that's compromised by some things in our history, but generally speaking, we are seen as a force for good in the world. So there is a case where people think, well, I want to go somewhere that's going to be decent, so I'll go to the UK. And of course, sadly, at the moment, they're not going to get a welcome that would reflect that. But there is another reason, it's a Brexit-related reason, which I don't know whether you would like it or not, but it's a fact that does encourage people to come here. And that's because when we were part of the European Union, we were part of a Europe-wide system, so people could come to Europe, make a single asylum claim. If that failed, then they had to be returned to their country of origin, and the EU had return agreements and so on. When we left the EU, we got rid of all those return agreements, so I don't think we've got a return agreement now with anybody other than Albania. But it is now the case that migrants can, of course, make separate claims in the EU and in the UK, and it is the case that a small number of people are making a claim in the EU, that's failing, and then they're coming to the UK to have another go. And if we had a system, an agreement with the EU, then that wouldn't be the case. But I also think we're asking the wrong question. Trying to make the UK less attractive to migrants is not a response that's going to have any validity in the long term. There are already large numbers of migrants. The number of migrants is only going to increase in the future as climate change gets worse. We need to have a conversation with our European allies, with the US, with Canada, with other nations where migrants are likely to want to go as climate change worsens, and sadly there are likely to be conflicts that result because of lack of water resources and whatever. We as the Western world are going to have to manage this. What are we going to do collectively? We can't do it alone as a single country. I fully recognise that, but we do need to work out with our comparator countries what we're going to do to manage this ongoing crisis.
Patrick, what are your thoughts on this? First of all, do you think that actually we shouldn't be making the UK less desirable? We should actually just be managing it in a different way?
Well, the first thing to say on that score is that if you're going to start talking about making it less desirable, then let's have a look at all the reasons why, and I think Mike's highlighted several of them, all the reasons why it is desirable. Things like if you have a family member here, another one that's good to mention is obviously it's the world language. And that's another attractor for people. Now, those aren't factors you can change. So rather than trying to change factors like that, you have to look at why is it that, for example, so you highlight the scenario of, okay, somebody has got a family member here. Well, couldn't they move to France instead or wherever, So it's just about
Well, when you say move to France,
narrative.
I mean, I suppose it's that thing about if you've got a family member, they're here, they speak English, they've got a job here. Why should they move to France?
I understand that, but it's one of those things where it's a case of saying, well, actually, that doesn't necessarily have to be an inevitability about coming to the UK. You have to challenge the narrative that it's inevitable, because really it isn't. We also have to challenge the narrative on whether or not it's a case of people's safety. Now, with that in mind, of course, Mike is quite right to point out that sometimes it's less about people's safety, it's more about the kind of life that they want to have. Well, that's fair enough. But there's another reality, which is that I should love it if this weren't a zero-sum game, but unfortunately it is. When it comes to the provision of our services, when it comes to our population density, particularly in England, and it's very necessary to look at that not just as the UK, but as England in particular. And you have to think, well, to what extent is this something that actually is going to detract from the quality of life for people who already live here, particularly people who either were born here or have come here through legal routes, and then inevitably, over the course of several decades, probably the people who are coming here now. So we have to think about, and this is a funny one, you have to think about sustainability here. And normally that's a point that's made by people who are somewhere on the other side of the spectrum than me. But actually, I do consider this to be a point of sustainability. So if we're asking, how do we make the UK less attractive? Well, what we have to do is make sure that, for example, that we take an approach that says, look, if you're someone who's willing to break our laws just to get into our country, then what are you going to do once you get there? Now, the government has taken measures that I think are what can only be described as premature at this point. You have the Rwanda scheme, that kind of thing. What they're trying to do is say, look,
the migrant barge plan, yeah.
The barges. So that's another good one, isn't it? I think we were going to move on to that.
Yeah.
So what they're now doing is they're saying, okay, we have some disused barges. We'll put people on those, instead of putting people in hotels, which were not necessarily disused at the time, and therefore that's not taking resources away from other people who already live here. But it is just about saying, look, at the end of the day, you've come here in a way that you shouldn't have done, and because it only applies to people who have done that. And if you're going to do that, then I don't think you can necessarily expect a warm welcome. What I think, where I agree completely with Mike is that absolutely a conversation does need to be had, but it does need to be a responsible adult conversation about what various countries can actually handle and how they can work together to try and make it work.
Also, I do want to come on to the migrant barge plan, but there are many people. I was having a conversation with somebody in the pub, as one does, and they were saying, why is it that we don't, instead of just putting them in hotels or whatever else, if we're going to, if in the end we know that so many of them are accepted as asylum seekers and therefore allowed in, why not spend that time educating them about the system, about how they're expected to behave here, making sure that they all speak really good English, for example, so that actually when they finally are processed, which as we know is a very slow process in this country, they're actually ready for work and in a really good shape, so that actually, people welcome them with open arms. I mean, that is one solution. Mike, can I ask you about the migrant barge plan? Good idea, bad idea?
Well, just a couple of things. It's not illegal to seek asylum. The asylum system globally works because it isn't illegal under international law to seek asylum. And I realise it's commonly said in the UK at the moment that it is illegal to do that, but it really isn't. So they're not breaking the law by coming in to try and seek asylum. No. If safe and legal routes were available, they would use them, but as we know, that they're not. In terms of the barge, and in terms of what you were just saying about should we educate them, should we be teaching them English, should we be integrating them into our society? Well, of course we could. At the moment, as you know, it takes 2 years for us to process an asylum claim. In Germany, it takes a month. Now, we are paying lots of money to keep people in hotels at the moment. We will soon be paying lots of money to keep people on a barge. Not like that's free either. If we're doing that for 2 years, that's a lot of money that we don't need to spend. If we process the claims, those people could then be living productive lives and getting jobs and contributing to our society. And this goes back to what Patrick was saying about it being a zero-sum game. It isn't a zero-sum game. You're assuming that these people are going to come into the country and do nothing other than sit in GP surgeries and try and take appointments that will go to somebody else. Well, they're not. They're going to come here. They're going to get jobs. They're going to start businesses. Some of them will be nurses. Some of them will be teachers. Some of them will be doctors, because either have been trained in those jobs in the first place, or they'll be trained in that job when they come and get here and they're integrated into society. So it really isn't a zero-sum game. And I realise that everybody's in a panic about the numbers, but the numbers that we're talking about, even worst-case scenario, will fit into a single football stadium. These are not huge numbers of people there, but they are important numbers of people because they're people who are very vulnerable, they're in need, but we need a viable system to take care of them. And Suella Braverman's plan at the moment, she's simply saying she's not going to process the claim. Well, she can't return them anywhere because we haven't got return agreements with any countries other than Albania. So she's not going to return them and she's not going to process the claim. They're going to be costing the state money in perpetuity. It's much cheaper to process the claim and then allow these people to come into the country, get education, get a job, contribute to society.
I am aware that the time is against us, and I do want to cover another couple of things. First of all, is the SNP. We know what's been going on in Scotland. I don't think we need to say any more about that, do we? Is it the end of the SNP, Patrick? I suppose we're not the end of the SNP, but maybe is it the kind of the end of them dominating Scottish politics?
Well, that's sort of what I was going to come on to say, really, is I think it's maybe more a case of saying it's the beginning of the end, and it may well be. Then again, it might not be, because, I mean, parties have come back from worse than this, and they have, really, they have. But it could well be the case, looking at the saga that has been going on. I think what we see now, actually, as the details begin to emerge, and of course we're not seeing much of it at the moment. There's an ongoing police investigation. Of course, it's quite right that none of us can really comment on that at this stage. But it looks as though the stage we've got to there, and just how far back it appears to go, would appear to mean that actually that there are going to be some revelations that come out at some point. And when you look at this sort of power couple, you had Nicola Sturgeon, obviously, as First Minister. You had her husband, who was chief executive of the party since 1999, was it, something like that? So you're actually looking at what may have been financial misdealings that go back over some period. Now, it allegedly depends on the...
Yes, allegedly, obviously, yeah.
Yeah, may have been, allegedly, but it looks like, let's say it turns out the way that some commentators have been suggesting that it might. Don't we can get away with that one? Then that is one of those where, you would certainly say the leadership establishment, that sort of thing, would be completely discredited. Now, that doesn't mean it can't be replaced. We now have Hamza Yousaf, who is coming in,
and who can draw a line under it, and therefore say that was then, this is now, and move forward. Mike, what do you think about the situation at the moment, and what do you think is the future? I mean, there are lots of people suggesting that this is very good news for the Labour Party, that it might finally get a bit of a foothold back in Scotland, but also the Tories saying that it might be good for them.
Well, I think we've got at least three things happening all at the same time. We've got the mess in the Scottish Nationalist Party, Nicola Sturgeon going, the revelations over money and the investigation into that. Obviously, we don't want to preempt what the conclusion of that might be. We've got resurgence of the Labour Party in Scotland. There was, for a long time, there was a vying for second place between Labour and the Conservatives. Over last year, with the Conservatives, with Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, etc., the Conservatives completely died off. Not completely, but largely. So Labour are now very evidently in second place in Scotland, and that's done Labour well. And we've also got simply the fact that there's no sign that independence is going to happen. I mean, there's zero chance of it happening. Neither Labour nor the Conservatives would give the Scots a referendum, so there can't be independence. And I think that is one of the things that is turning Scots' minds to other issues, and just simply the fact that the SNP haven't been very good at governing. Their healthcare isn't great, their education isn't great, their economy isn't doing great, and I think people are paying more attention to that. So the SNP's woes are not just about mismanagement at the top or potential mismanagement at the top. It's not just about money and where does that money go. It's not just about the change of leader. It's also about the fact that the Scots are waking up and thinking, well, actually, these guys have been governing our country for a long time. Have they done a good job? And on the things that matter, no, they haven't. And I think that all these things together, yes, they are gaining a hearing for the Labour Party. Plus the fact that Anna Sewell, the Scottish Labour leader, is, I think, probably their best and most articulate, clearest leader for some time. And that, again, combined with his capable colleagues, is making a difference.
I just want to very briefly touch on this Easter travel chaos. I don't know whether you can see this Anybody who was travelling yesterday, oh my goodness, if you were travelling if you were travelling pretty much any single which way apart from bicycle perhaps, was not a good time. The headline is, what's this paper? The Daily Express. Lots of people arguing and pushing like the last train out of Saigon. I mean, it really was nose to tail, wasn't it? And I suppose it's that other thing, isn't it, Patrick? Just very briefly, I suppose there are lots of people who are saying, yes, but if it's Easter. It's Easter, and we are, and that's what we do. And then they always say there's always some works going on and everything else. Is this just a thing that we do every year?
Well, I think it is worth bearing in mind, that this does happen. But I was thinking about this actually when I read this coverage the first time, and I do think, do you know what? It would help if the maintenance work that's been going on, particularly in some London stations, that's been closing rail travel around the southeast and southwest of the country, well, actually, if people coordinated a bit better, if they weren't all doing these works at the same time, you know, if they could be staggered to some degree, then maybe you asked the question, how can we fix this? Well, I think the way we fix this is we try to make sure that there's some efficiency and there's some coordination between travel services and maintenance services, so that we don't with everything happening at once.
Hey, Mike, I've just come up with a really good idea whilst I've been sitting here. So what you do is you tell each companies, you go, if you're in the communications business, you have to stop on Wednesday. So you've got Thursday, Friday, Saturday. See what I mean? You know, then stagger it. Why not? It wouldn't work.
We've got a long-term problem in our country for investment. But I don't know if you guys travel to, you know, say France, Germany, one of those nations, on holiday. But whenever I go abroad, you know, for work or for pleasure, I arrive and I expect the transport network to work, and it does. You know, you arrive and you get a train, you get a tram, you get a bus, things connect. And you just assume it's going to work, and it does. You're in the UK, and you assume it's pretty much not going to work. I mean, this morning, I was going to get a train, it was cancelled. The train afterwards cancelled as well. So I now can't get where I need to go by train, so I need to find another way to do it. And this, thankfully, it doesn't happen that often, but it does happen. And you compare the transport network in London, where there has been a great deal of investment over the last 20 or 30 years, to anywhere else in the country. I mean, I live in Sheffield. The transport network hasn't changed here since I was a kid, you know, by and large. Trains are a little bit better, but they're not much better, and there's certainly haven't any new lines built.
I know, and it's why Andy Burnham always gets very hot under the collar about the fact that things work the further south you go. We are going to leave it there. Thank you very much. That's Mike Buckley, political commentator, Patrick Timms, editor, Wolves of Westminster. It's 8:47. We'll take a break.